She shoved two trucks into my garage without permission, then turned around and filed a $2,000 whole complaint accusing me of running an unauthorized business. What she didn't know was that I rent that garage to the county sheriff. One Tuesday at 6 a.m., I stepped outside to see both massive diesel rigs blocking my garage doors. The engines were still warm, fumes hung in the air, and oil had already begun to soak into my concrete. The sharp stench of fresh motor oil and cooling engines hit me immediately. From her kitchen window, Brenda stood with a coffee mug in hand, grinning smugly, like she'd just outplayed me in a match I hadn't agreed to. What she didn't realize was that Deputy Martinez was due in 2 hours to collect tactical gear. And that whole complaint she'd filed. Soon it would serve as evidence in her own harassment case. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with someone who keeps meticulous records and leases property to law enforcement. Now tell me, what would you do if a neighbor commandeered your garage and then fined you for it? Share your craziest neighbor story. My name's Dale. At 52, I've learned that most problems have straightforward fixes. Nearly 3 decades as a Ford dealership mechanic taught me patience, precision, and how to catch trouble before it explodes into disaster. But Brenda was something I wasn't prepared for. After my wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago, I inherited our corner lot ranch house in Millfield, Texas. Cancer claimed her quickly, and the medical bills stripped everything else. Now it's just me, my German Shepherd Rex, and a property I can barely afford. What saved me was an unexpected deal. The county sheriff's office needed a secure place for storage, and my detached 3-car garage fit the bill. $400 a month doesn't sound like much, but when you're scraping by on disability and a thin pension, that check makes the difference between keeping your house and losing it to foreclosure. Deputy Martinez has been leasing the space for 18 months. He stores tactical gear, emergency supplies, and evidence bags. Drops by twice a week, always professional and respectful. The garage still carries the honest scent of motor oil from my mechanic days, now mixed with the metallic tang of police equipment and faint chemical notes from evidence. Storage. It's a perfect arrangement, benefits the community and keeps my lights on. Then Brenda moved in next door. Picture a woman who thinks her landscaping business gives her authority over the neighborhood. 6 months ago, she arrived with her husband Chuck, an oil rig worker conveniently away 11 months of the year. Within a week, she'd wriggled her way onto the whole board and launched her crusade to raise property values, which really meant making everyone miserable until they bowed to her vision. She owns 2 oversized trucks, one packed with mowers and mulch spreaders, the other a personal pickup that could tow a small building. Too big for her driveway, but instead of paying for proper storage, she decided my property was easier. The warning signs started 2 months back with her backyard bash. Full-on catered event DJ, mountains of food, and enough booze to float a barge. The bass rattled my windows until midnight. Around noon that day, both her trucks appeared in my driveway like they belonged there. I walked over politely, already fighting a headache from the mix of barbecue smoke and diesel exhaust. Brenda, I need you to move your trucks. Deputy Martinez is scheduled to come by this afternoon. She barely looked up from arranging her catered spread. It's just temporary overflow parking. This is my property, not a public lot. Her tone went icy. Don't be so dramatic, Dale. One afternoon won't hurt anyone. Those trucks stayed for 6 hours while her party thundered on. When Martinez arrived, he had to park on the street and weave around her vehicles like they were permanent fixtures. Gravel crunched under his boots as he took the long way around. Too professional to comment, but the irritation showed. I apologized to him 3 times, one of the most humiliating moments of my retirement. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about convenience. It was about control. Brenda was making a statement that her priorities outweighed everyone else's, even the sheriff's department. The harassment didn't take long to ramp up. By the very next week, I spotted her out front, snapping pictures of my property like some wannabe private investigator compiling evidence. She photographed everything: my garden, my fence, even Rex's doghouse. Just updating whole neighborhood records, she claimed, wearing that same frosty grin. Soon after, I received a violation notice, cheap copy paper that crinkled like dry leaves in my hands. Unapproved commercial activity detected. Cease all unauthorized business within 30 days or pay a $2,000 fine. She was aiming directly at the one thing keeping me afloat. Standing there with that flimsy notice, watching her smirk from her kitchen window, it all clicked. This wasn't ordinary neighbor trouble. This was a deliberate, calculated attack. Brenda had studied my circumstances, found my weak spot, and was launching an economic assault to cut off my income and force me out. She just didn't realize she'd picked the wrong retired mechanic to take on. Rex growled low, already sensing the tension. That dog knew we were under siege before I fully grasped it myself. Just 3 days after the barbecue debacle, Brenda fired her first official shot. A certified letter arrived. Thick with that intimidating legal envelope that practically screams lawyer fees incoming. The sender, Millfield Meadows Homeowners Association, but the paperwork practically reeked of Brenda's cheap perfume. The complaint accused me of running an unlicensed commercial business in violation of zoning laws. In her carefully written fantasy, my lease with the sheriff's office was a business operation that threatened property values and neighborhood character. Her demand, shut it down immediately and cough up a $2,000 fine. But here's where her strategy backfired. She scheduled an emergency whole board meeting for Tuesday, then forgot to notify me until Monday afternoon. Classic ambush. Catch your opponent unprepared and steamroll them with procedure. But she underestimated me. That Saturday, I headed to the county courthouse, wading through the smell of aged paper and dusty files. The records room was as lifeless as a tomb. But buried paperwork can sometimes hold dynamite. Well, I'll be damned, muttered Martha, the clerk, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed my deed. Your garage was built in 1987. That makes it 15 years older than this hoa. That's what we call grandfathered use, honey. Martha explained what I'd never even thought of. Any structure built before the HOA existed was protected. Those grandfathered rights meant their new rules couldn't touch me. Sarah would have loved that detail. She always believed knowledge was the sharpest weapon. And the best part, a little digging into Brenda's own situation revealed she was breaking the law herself. City code clearly states any commercial vehicle weighing over 10,000 pounds needs a permit for overnight residential parking. Both of her landscaping trucks tipped the scales way past that limit. And she had 0 permits on file. So by Tuesday night, I walked into the community center meeting ready for battle. The place smelled of burnt coffee and anxious sweat. 5 board members sat behind a flimsy folding table that looked borrowed from a church sale, with Brenda planted right in the middle, presiding like a judge. Mr. Hensley, she began, shuffling her papers with fake authority, your unauthorized commercial lease violates Section 4.3 of our residential covenant. The board is prepared to issue immediate fines. I leaned forward, sliding my stack of courthouse records across the table. Not so fast, counselor. My garage was built in 1987. Your hole wasn't even formed until 2002. That gives me 15 years of grandfathered rights. The shuffle of papers echoed in the sudden hush. You could have heard a pin drop until Frank Morrison, retired postmaster and lifelong resident, broke into a laugh like he just heard the funniest punchline of his life. Dale's got it exactly right, Frank declared, peering at my paperwork. I remember when you built that garage. My late wife, Clara, brought you lemonade while you were out there hammering away. Brenda's complexion shifted from white to crimson to a deep shade of purple in seconds. That's irrelevant. Current zoning laws override old ones. Oh, current zoning, I countered, dragging out the words with relish. Then let's talk about Section 12.7, commercial vehicles in residential zones. I laid down photographs of her trucks, complete with manufacturer weight specs and time-stamped shots of them parked overnight. Both your vehicles are over the 10,000-pound limit. You've been out of compliance for 6 months without a single permit. Frank slapped the table, still laughing. Well, Brenda, maybe you should brush up on those zoning laws before you start waving them at other people. Looks like Dale just turned the tables on you. The room froze while the board absorbed what had just unfolded. Brenda had walked herself into her own trap, trying to weaponize zoning laws against me while breaking them herself. Her face cycled through half a rainbow of embarrassment before she snapped. "This is absurd," she shouted, her Fox authority collapsing like soggy cardboard. "I'm trying to protect our property values from his so-called police compound." "You mean the lease that brings county law enforcement into our neighborhood twice a week?" asked Patricia Walsh, her tone dripping with sweetness. "The same arrangement that probably lowered everyone's insurance premiums." The meeting unraveled faster than a cheap tent in a storm. Brenda ranted about real legal action before storming out, leaving her violation notice behind like it was toxic waste. The board quickly voted for 2-0 to throw out every charge against me and, to top it off, issued her a formal citation for the illegal trucks. Walking back to my pickup, I could practically taste victory in the crisp evening air, mingled with the faint diesel exhaust from her oversized rigs. But through her kitchen window, I spotted Brenda pacing furiously, phone clutched to her ear. No doubt speed-dealing every lawyer and city official she could dig up. The next morning proved me right. Her trucks were conveniently parked to block my mailbox, not technically unlawful, but aggravating enough to send a message. By noon, the city had logged an anonymous complaint about excessive dog barking on my property. Rick's hadn't been noisy since he was a pup, but facts mean little in a harassment campaign. Round 1 went to me. But Brenda was only just gearing up. Her humiliation at the HOA meeting lasted all of 48 hours before she elevated the fight to City Hall. Friday morning, a certified letter from Millfield City Planning landed in my mailbox. Covered in so many official seals it looked fit for a federal courtroom, the complaint accused me of turning my lease into an unauthorized quasi-commercial district, supposedly damaging the neighborhood's residential character. Attached were color photographs, Deputy Martinez's patrol car in my driveway, equipment drop-offs, even candid shots of me speaking with county staff. Someone had been staking out my property with a telephoto lens. The citation leaned on Municipal Code Section 8.4, demanding my appearance at a planning commission hearing in 2 weeks. But one detail caught my eye. The complaint listed concerned residents as the filer, yet the paperwork was processed by Jennifer Walsh at City Planning. The name clicked immediately. Patricia Walsh from the whole board had mentioned her daughter worked downtown. Small towns have a way of keeping trouble in the family. Still, not all family trees grow the same way. Patricia had a knack for fairness, and it looked like Jennifer might have inherited it. I figured it was time to meet her before that hearing. The planning office was buried in the basement of a building clearly designed by someone allergic to sunlight. It smelled of old carpet and dashed hopes. Jennifer herself looked worn out, mid-30s, fidgeting with papers and dodging eye contact as though I carried a contagious plague. Hensley, she began nervously. "I suppose you're here about the zoning complaint." "I'm here for the truth," I said, settling into a rickety visitor's chair that groaned like old bones. Because I'd been wondering how anyone knew to file this complaint with exactly the right legal wording and at just the right moment. Her face flushed redder than a stoplight. "I can't comment on active cases," she muttered. "Fair enough," I replied. "But while I'm here, maybe you can clear something up for me about home business permits." The night before, I'd buried myself in municipal code until my vision blurred research that would have made Sarah proud. What I uncovered was simple. Operating a landscaping company out of your home requires permits, especially when you're storing commercial trucks and meeting clients on the property. Brenda's business registration listed her residence as headquarters, yet she'd never filed for a home occupation permit. It was like leaving your door wide open, then screaming about thieves. "Let's say, hypothetically," I continued, sliding printed code across the desk. "What happens when someone runs a business from a residential address without the proper permits?" Jennifer scanned the paperwork, her professional mask collapsing like paper in the rain. "These trucks, how heavy are they?" she asked quietly. "Over 12,000 pounds each," I answered, savoring the moment. Both registered as commercial vehicles. Both parked overnight in a residential neighborhood. Both without permits. The irony couldn't have been sweeter. Brenda wielding zoning laws against me, while breaking them herself. "And there's more," I added, producing photos from her infamous barbecue. They showed her conducting client consultations, writing estimates, discussing designs, even collecting payments, every bit of it commercial activity on residential land. Jennifer stared at the evidence as if it might detonate. Mr. Hensley, this puts me in a difficult position. I'm not asking you to do anything improper, I assured her. I just think the commission should have the full picture before ruling on what residential character really means. 2 weeks later, the hearing chamber was packed shoulder to shoulder. Brenda marched in with a briefcase and enough bravado to power a small city. She'd even dragged her husband Chuck along, though he looked like he'd rather wrestle a bear. Mr. Hensley's lease arrangement fundamentally disrupts the residential character of our neighborhood, she began, reading from her notes like a stage actress. We have clear proof of increased traffic, commercial vehicle storage, and unapproved business operations. She spread her photos with the confidence of a prosecutor, delivering a slam-dunk case, every picture framed to make my garage look like a trucking depot. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch for maximum weight. Commission members, Mrs. Thompson is absolutely right about protecting residential integrity, which is exactly why I was stunned to discover her own repeated violations of the same codes she cites. I laid out my evidence piece by piece: Brenda's unpermitted home-based business, her overweight trucks parked in violation of residential rules, her client meetings held without zoning variances. Every charge she'd leveled against me, she herself was guilty of worse. The knockout blow came from Jennifer Walsh, who had done her homework. The commission already had a complete file of Brenda's violations sitting on the table. Chairman Robert Hayes cleared his throat, his voice heavy with authority. Mrs. Thompson, it appears you're running a commercial landscaping operation from your residence without the required permits. Brenda's self-assured mask melted faster than ice cream on a Texas sidewalk. That's completely different, she stammered. Actually, Hayes continued, Mr. Hensley's arrangement is properly documented and fully legal. Yours is not. The vote was unanimous 5-0. My case dismissed. Brenda officially cited for unpermitted commercial activity. Chuck slumped beside her, wishing he could disappear under the table. When I left that hearing, victory carried on the air along with Brenda's humiliation, but I knew the battle wasn't over. Someone like her doesn't back down after 2 very public defeats. Sure enough, the next morning, new scratches scarred my mailbox, and an insurance claim notice appeared on my driveway. Round 2 went to Dale, but the real game was just beginning. The insurance claim notice showed up in my driveway like spoiled leftovers, fluttering in the morning breeze next to what looked suspiciously like fresh vandalism. According to Brenda's neatly prepared complaint, Deputy Martinez's patrol car had supposedly clipped her fence during a routine visit, leaving behind major damage and creating an ongoing safety hazard. Her demand $3,500 in repairs, plus extra cash for emotional distress and inconvenience. I went to inspect the so-called damage, Rex padding along beside me, nose twitching. The scratches on her wooden fence still reeked of solvent, that sharp chemical bite of fresh paint thinner. The marks were imperfectly straight, uniform lines at bumper height too precise to be an accident. Unless Deputy Martinez had developed the ability to scrape wood through thin air, somebody had staged this with spray paint and a putty knife. Morning, Dale, called my neighbor Mildred from her rose garden, snipping blossoms with surgical precision. At 78, she'd seen the neighborhood transform from farmland to subdivisions, and her memory was sharper than her shears. Noticed some odd activity at Brenda's place last night. She was out there with a can, working that fence pretty hard. Mildred paused, giving me a look that could slice glass. Funny thing, I walked past that fence yesterday afternoon, didn't see a mark on it. Mildred's Ring doorbell was practically the subdivision's surveillance system, catching everything from package drop-offs to Brenda's harassment stunts. Might want to check my video around 6:30 last night, she suggested. The quiet confidence of someone who knows evidence trumps accusations. I called my insurance company immediately and was connected to Carl Thompson, an investigator who'd been chasing fraud longer than I'd been turning wrenches. His voice carried the weariness of a man who'd seen every scam twice over. Mr. Hensley, We see at least half a dozen bogus claims like this every month. Most folks don't even stage them well, which makes my job easy. Carl explained the process: timeline checks, physical inspection, witness accounts, and, most damning of all, video review. What makes this suspicious? I asked, already knowing the answer. For one thing, Carl said, the claim came in less than 12 hours after the alleged damage, with high-resolution photos and a repair estimate conveniently from a contractor registered at the same address as the claimant. That's either incredible efficiency or very deliberate planning. The next morning, Carl showed up with tools and a camera sharp enough to photograph dust motes. He studied the fence like a crime scene. Too neat, too consistent, and all from the wrong angle, he said, pointing out the even depth of the lines. A car leaves jagged, and even patterns from force and momentum. This looks like someone used hand tools and maybe even a ruler to guide the strokes. Then came the knockout blow, Mildred's ring footage. At 6:47 p.m. hours after Deputy Martinez had left, Brenda was caught red-handed, carefully applying gray spray paint and tidy horizontal strokes. The video was so sharp you could read the Rust-Oleum label on the can. The timestamp erased any doubt. You could even hear her muttering to herself, probably rehearsing her victim routine. When Carl presented the footage, the transformation was instant. Brenda went from smug accuser to cornered culprit faster than a muscle car slamming into a wall. "Mrs. Thompson," Carl said evenly. The patience of a man accustomed to breaking bad news. "Insurance fraud is a felony. Penalties include heavy fines, potential jail time, and a permanent criminal record." The color drained from her face like someone had pulled the plug. "This is all a misunderstanding," she mumbled, suddenly unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I was only fixing old damage," Brenda insisted weakly. "The footage shows you causing damage, not repairing it," Carl replied, flipping through his notes with the precision of a prosecutor reading out charges. "You've got 24 hours to withdraw this claim voluntarily, or I'll be forwarding it to the county prosecutor for criminal fraud." By lunchtime, Brenda had withdrawn the complaint, but the damage to her reputation was irreversible. In small towns, rumors spread faster than wildfire, and by that evening, everyone knew about her botched insurance scam. That night, through their open kitchen window, I overheard Chuck finally lose his patience. His voice carried the rage of a man pushed past his limits. "Brenda, this has to stop. Insurance fraud. Are you serious? I'm not going to jail just because you can't stand losing." Their marriage was buckling under the weight of her obsession, and Chuck was already calculating his escape. But cornered people can be the most dangerous. The very next morning, Animal Control received anonymous complaints about Rex's aggressive behavior, and a surprise inspection notice from the health department appeared on my door. Citing supposed unsanitary conditions, Brenda was clearly running out of official levers to pull, which meant she was about to get inventive. Round 3. And I could feel the real war just starting. The county tax reassessment notice arrived that Tuesday, on a day that began like any other but ended with my world tilted sideways. Millfield County claimed it was conducting routine property value reviews, a polite way of saying we need more money, and you're going to supply it. According to the paperwork spread across my kitchen table, my modest ranch home had appreciated 40% over the last 3 years. The result? My property taxes were about to jump from tough but manageable to catastrophic, nearly $6,000 a year, double my current bill. With only a disability pension and Social Security, I couldn't possibly cover that, not without the sheriff's lease. And even with that $400 monthly, I'd be cutting it dangerously close. Something about the timing felt deliberate. Right after Brenda's public humiliation at the HOA and Planning Commission, suddenly my taxes doubled. And the notice wasn't countywide, it targeted just for addresses. All long-time residents on fixed incomes, all coincidentally battling new home issues. The next morning, I went straight to the assessor's office, a place that smelled of old carpet and weary bureaucracy. Jana, the overworked clerk, pulled up my file. "Your property was flagged for review," she explained, highlighting notes in the report. The complaint said converted residential space into a business without permits. Anonymous, of course. But the details were suspiciously specific: sheriff's lease, equipment storage, even alleged modifications to my garage that didn't exist. "Jana," I said, forcing my voice calm, "that garage was built in 1987. Nothing's been altered since." She frowned at the screen. "The report describes recent commercial upgrades and increased property use. That's what the assessor based the higher valuation on. It was a system designed to squeeze people out. An anonymous complaint triggers a reassessment, the taxes jump, and homeowners on fixed incomes are forced to sell. Elegant in its cruelty." Then Jana mentioned something that shifted everything. This complaint didn't come through the usual path. Normally, reassessment requests come from agents or developers. This one came straight from a city planning office referral. City planning. Jennifer Walsh. I drove directly to City Hall, where Jennifer sat waiting, guilt written all over her face. Before I could even speak, she blurted, "Mr. Hensley, I need to tell you something about that reassessment." She confessed Brenda had been leaning on her, pushing for creative solutions against property owners she saw as obstacles, especially older or disabled residents less able to fight back. The reassessment had been intended as the killing blow: wreck me financially, make the sheriff's lease unsustainable, and open the door for someone to scoop up my property. "She's been asking about others, too," Jennifer admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Patterson on Elm, the Rodriguezes on Oak, longtime homeowners, all suddenly hit with HOA complaints." The pattern snapped into focus. Brenda wasn't just harassing me, she was running a coordinated campaign to drive out established neighbors and snatch up undervalued homes for her landscaping empire. But Jennifer's guilt had finally tipped the balance and handed me a weapon I hadn't expected. "I made copies before I realized what she was up to," Jennifer confessed, sliding a manila envelope across her desk. Inside were Brenda's requests, the full text of the complaint, and even email chains discussing so-called neighborhood investment opportunities. She hesitated, finally meeting my eyes. "I can't undo the reassessment right away, but this evidence should help you fight it." Walking back to my truck, I felt the pieces locked together like gears in a machine Sarah would have spotted instantly. This wasn't just petty harassment. This was a calculated business plan. Brenda had studied vulnerable homeowners, learned their financial limits, and created a strategy to push them out with harassment and red tape. Too bad she'd chosen the wrong old mechanic to underestimate. It was time to stop reacting and go on the offensive. That manila envelope felt like holding live dynamite. But dynamite is only useful if you know how to set it off. I needed allies. And in small towns, networks of people looking out for one another often go back generations longer than Brenda had been alive. My first stop was the basement office of the Legal Aid Society in the county courthouse, a cramped room that smelled of stale coffee and persistence. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, Deputy Martinez's sister, as it turned out specialized in elder abuse and property rights, she examined Jennifer's documents with the intensity of a surgeon reading x-rays. "This isn't neighbor squabbling," she said, spreading the papers across her desk like a war map. "It's systematic harassment with financial motivation, an intimidation campaign designed to force property sales." Rebecca explained the playbook. Step 1. Identify properties in desirable locations owned by people with limited means to fight back. Step 2. Use official mechanisms, HOA citations, city violations, code enforcement to crank up financial pressure. Step 3. Escalate until the owners either sell at a discount or lose their homes outright. Your situation is textbook predatory behavior, she concluded. But this kind of detailed documentation, that's rare. Most victims don't even realize what's happening until it's too late. She laid out a legal strategy: document everything, file harassment reports with multiple agencies, prepare both civil and criminal actions. More importantly, she suggested expanding the circle. People like Brenda rarely stop at one target, Rebecca warned. If we identify others, we can show a pattern authorities can't ignore. My next destination was Mildred's house. She called it afternoon tea, but it looked more like a war council. Round her kitchen table sat 3 longtime residents, each battling suspicious new complaints. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street had suddenly received Noise citations over her air conditioning unit. The Rodriguez family on Oak Avenue was accused of improperly storing their work truck. And Frank Morrison, our retired postmaster, had been cited for excessive lawn ornaments, the same garden gnomes that had decorated his yard for 15 years. Brenda's been busy, Mildred observed dryly, topping off coffee cups like a general fueling her troops. Every single complaint within the past 6 months had gone after people with deep roots in the neighborhood. The pattern was undeniable once you looked for it: calculated harassment to drive out long-timers and scoop up properties. Frank had dug into whole meeting minutes and uncovered a troubling trend. She's been asking for property values, ownership lengths, even financial hardship cases, he said, adjusting his glasses. Requested a list of all residents over 65, claimed it was for community outreach. In reality, she was compiling target lists with military precision. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher whose sharp eyes had kept generations of teenagers honest, had noticed something else. She's been snooping while people are gone, taking photos, measuring driveways, even peeking at mailboxes for mortgage letters. It was surveillance, disguised as curiosity, building intel for perfectly timed attacks. We agreed to coordinate under what Mildred diplomatically called enhanced neighborhood communication. Everyone would log incidents with dates, times, and photos. Frank would keep an eye on whole activity. Mrs. Patterson would rally other affected residents and connect them with resources. My job would be to handle contact with law enforcement and legal aid. But our strongest asset was the wider community, which had been quietly taking note of Brenda's antics all along. Small-town businesses rely on stability. And harassment campaigns don't just hurt homeowners, they threaten property values for everyone. Tony Castellanos, owner of the hardware store where Deputy Martinez shopped, offered to flag suspicious purchases. She came in last week asking about motion sensors and cameras. He told me, said she needed to track boundary violations. Didn't sit right with me, so I told her we were out at the diner. Maria Santos had overheard Brenda's lunch meetings with contractors and real estate contacts. She's been talking about development opportunities, Maria reported, like flipping properties, even mentioned specific houses and what she thought they'd sell for. The evidence was stacking up. Brenda wasn't just waging a personal grudge, she was running a full-blown campaign, and she thought no one would connect the dots. Now, thanks to Jennifer, Rebecca, and a network of watchful neighbors, she was about to learn otherwise. By that evening, we had compiled what Rebecca called the most thorough harassment files she'd ever reviewed: videos, witness testimonies, financial documentation, and, most importantly, proof that Brenda had been systematically targeting vulnerable homeowners. We now had enough evidence to submit formal complaints to the county sheriff, the district attorney, the state real estate commission, and even the federal housing authority. But evidence only has value when you know how to deploy it. Rebecca arranged a series of meetings with law enforcement for the following week, while I prepared myself for Brenda's inevitable retaliation. Predators don't quit when cornered. They get reckless. And Brenda was about to prove the rule. The morning after our coalition meeting, I stepped outside to find motor oil poured across my driveway, thick, stinking, and slick as ice. Cleaning it would cost hundreds, and the timing was no accident. Deputy Martinez was due later that day for his weekly inspection, and Brenda had clearly hoped to humiliate me in front of him. But she'd slipped up. Oil leaves traces, and this particular trail dripped from my driveway to the storm drain, then continued straight toward her property. Worse still for her, it was the same high-viscosity oil used in landscaping machines, complete with distinctive chemical additives that lab tests could easily identify. I phoned Rebecca immediately, and she had environmental services on site within hours. Dumping petroleum products illegally carries serious environmental penalties, especially when storm drains and water systems are involved. The sabotage didn't stop there. Over the course of the week, her efforts became more brazen yet increasingly sloppy. Someone loosened the bolts on my mailbox post, leaving it ready to topple into the street. My garden hose was cut in several places, flooding the yard and destroying Sarah's cherished rose bushes. Worst of all, Rex's water bowl was tampered with, filled with what reeked of bleach. A rushed trip to the vet confirmed it was an intentional poisoning attempt. Each incident was carefully logged, photos, timestamps, and testimony from neighbors who were now on high alert. The picture was clear. Brenda was unraveling. She'd moved from hiding behind legal complaints to childish vandalism, leaving evidence trails even an amateur could follow. Mildred's Ring doorbell cameras caught shadowy figures sneaking through our yards after midnight, always entering from Brenda's direction. The footage wasn't sharp enough for an ID. But the timing and movement patterns were damning. Then Frank Morrison unearthed something explosive while combing through whole records. He discovered Brenda had been using official board letterhead to file fake complaints with multiple city agencies, noise violations, health code breaches, even bogus dumping accusations, all aimed at the same long-established residents. She wasn't just harassing neighbors anymore, she was impersonating the hoe to weaponize city bureau. Crazy. That crossed the line into outright fraud. The real breakthrough came from Mrs. Patterson's new security system. After her AC unit had been tampered with, she installed motion-activated cameras. On Tuesday night, those cameras caught Brenda in crystal-clear footage, prying at electrical connections on the unit, time-stamped, high resolution. Unmistakably her, that single clip provided ironclad proof of trespassing and attempted property damage. But Brenda's gravest mistake came 2 days later. Thursday morning, a kitchen fire broke out at Mrs. Morgan's home 3 blocks away. As firefighters arrived, they discovered access routes blocked by construction barriers that hadn't existed the day before. The delay forced them to drag hoses an extra 100 yards, costing precious minutes while smoke filled the house of an elderly woman. Fire Chief William Torres was livid. At an emergency council meeting that afternoon, his statement was blunt. Someone deliberately obstructed fire department access during an active emergency. That's not vandalism. That's criminal endangerment that nearly cost a life. The investigation revealed the barriers had been purchased from Brenda's usual supplier and placed at points designed to cripple response times in our neighborhood. With that revelation, Brenda's campaign officially crossed from harassment and civil disputes into full-scale criminal territory. Deputy Martinez submitted a detailed report to the county prosecutor outlining the escalating harassment, property damage, and threats to public safety. This has gone well past neighborhood squabbles, he stated in his official testimony. We're looking at coordinated criminal activity aimed at forcing property sales through intimidation and sabotage. Local journalist Sarah Kim picked up the story after Chief Torres' fiery remarks about blocked emergency access. Her first article, Systematic Harassment Campaign Targets Elderly Residents, spread quickly, drawing attention from neighboring towns that had seen similar schemes. The momentum was building, far beyond Brenda's ability to spin or suppress. By the end of that week, Brenda's landscaping company was bleeding clients as the news circulated. Chuck's truck was missing from their driveway most evenings, and neighbors overheard explosive arguments about attorneys, divorce, and looming bankruptcy. The collapse she had tried to inflict on others was now unraveling her own life. But predators lash out hardest when they realize their empire is falling. Saturday morning, I found an envelope shoved under my door. Inside were photos of my daily routines, Rex's walk schedule, and even snapshots taken through my kitchen window. The threat was unmistakable, if legal. Harassment couldn't push me out, maybe fear and intimidation would. It was clear the final confrontation had arrived. We had evidence, the community's backing, and a legal strategy. Now it was time to end this. Sunday dawned and naturally quiet, the kind of silence that makes you glance over your shoulder. I was outside filling Rex's water bowl when Brenda appeared at my back gate. She wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt, clearly meant to project reasonable neighbor. If I hadn't spent months cataloging her campaign of sabotage, I might almost have believed the act. Dale, she called in a syrupy voice that made my teeth ache. Can we talk? I think it's time to clear up these little misunderstandings. She carried a thick manila envelope. Knowing her history with envelopes, I suspected it wasn't paperwork. Before I opened the gate, I discreetly started the recording app on my phone. Rebecca's insistence on documenting every encounter had become second nature. What can I do for you, Brenda, I asked evenly, while Rex stationed himself protectively between us. Look, I know things have gotten a bit out of hand, she began, reciting a speech she'd obviously rehearsed, but I've been thinking maybe we can settle this without dragging in lawyers and courts. She opened the envelope and produced a stack of cash thick enough to stop your breath. I'm willing to give you $20,000 in cash if you agree to end your deal with the sheriff's department. Clean break, no animosity. Everybody walks away happy, the smell of fresh bills mingled with her desperation. For someone in my position facing rising property taxes and legal expenses, that was no small sum. Brenda knew exactly how tempting it might look. That's quite the offer, I said carefully, letting her keep talking. But why would you want me to cancel a perfectly legal arrangement that helps the community? Her tone sharpened with urgency. Between us, Dale, I've got big plans for this neighborhood, development projects that could benefit everyone. But they need some adjustments to current circumstances. There it was, the confession Rebecca had been waiting for. Brenda was openly admitting to a deliberate scheme, manipulating property values, driving out long-time residents, and clearing the way for redevelopment. What sort of development projects? I asked, coaxing her along while the recorder captured every word. Your corner lot is prime, she explained, her voice quickening like a salesperson closing a deal. Perfect spot, existing utilities, easy access for trucks. With the right improvements, it could be worth 3 times what you paid. Of course, she paused dramatically, that would mean removing certain obstacles that interfere with proper growth. It was a textbook bribery attempt, pure and simple. But Brenda wasn't finished digging herself deeper. And I should tell you, she added coldly, if you're not interested in this settlement, things could become very difficult for you. Her tone hardened. I've got contacts at City Hall, County Planning, even the State Real Estate Commission. The kind of people who can make life very unpleasant for anyone and willing to cooperate with legitimate business opportunities. That was no longer a bribe, it was outright extortion. I could practically imagine Rebecca in her office, silently applauding as Brenda dug herself deeper. Are you threatening me, Brenda? I asked, giving her one last opportunity to retreat before she crossed the line into felony territory. I'm just laying out reality, she said coolly, with the smugness of someone convinced the system was on her side. Small towns thrive on connections and favors. Folks who support community improvement projects don't usually run into problems with permits, inspections, or tax assessments, but people who fight progress, they often discover bureaucracy can get very difficult. The recorder in my pocket was capturing every word, proof of attempted bribery, extortion, and misuse of public office ties. Yet Brenda wasn't finished. Think carefully, Dale. 20,000 in cash, no questions, and you walk away from this with a clean slate. Or keep resisting and watch how complicated your life becomes. She pushed the envelope across my patio table like she was shoving all her chips into the pot. I need your decision by tomorrow night. After that, the offer disappears, and we do things the hard way. I glanced at the money, then at Brenda's calculating expression, then at Rex, who was growling low, vibrating with warning. I'll definitely think about it, I said truthfully, though what I'd be thinking about was how to hand this recording over to the prosecutor. Mind if I hold on to this while I decide? Her smile was predatory, satisfied. Of course. Just remember, this is your chance to walk away from all this unpleasantness with both your dignity and your wallet intact. She turned to leave, then tossed an afterthought over her shoulder that sealed her fate. Oh, and Dale, I'd hate for anything to happen to Rex while you're making up your mind. Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents in neighborhoods where people don't cooperate. That was it, the final nail in her coffin. Rex wasn't property, he was family. And threatening family meant Brenda had declared total war on someone who had the evidence, the allies, and the legal firepower to finish her for good. The next evening promised fireworks. The town council chambers had never seen anything like that Tuesday night. Every chair filled, people lining the walls, a crowd spilling into the hallway. It felt less like a municipal meeting and more like a championship game. Word of the showdown had swept through Millfield faster than Sunday gossip. I arrived early, lugging a briefcase packed with evidence that felt heavier than a toolbox. Rebecca sat beside me, radiating the quiet authority of an attorney who'd spent the weekend sharpening every argument. Behind us, our coalition assembled like a battle line, Mildred with her tablet of security footage, Frank clutching whole records, Mrs. Patterson with her meticulous notes, and a dozen neighbors who had endured Brenda's campaign. Channel 7 had cameras rolling, following up on Sarah Kim's viral newspaper piece about what she dubbed the Millfield harassment scandal. Reporter Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the city planner, was already interviewing residents about the pattern of intimidation targeting elderly homeowners. The story had grown legs, and everyone knew tonight would determine whether truth triumphed over money. Brenda made her entrance late, trailed by a high-priced attorney whose hourly fee probably exceeded my monthly pension. She was dressed for maximum credibility: dark suit, modest jewelry, hair pulled back in a professional style straight out of a consultant's handbook, but her eyes betrayed her, sharp, frantic. The look of someone who knew her carefully constructed empire was seconds from imploding. Mayor Patricia Rodriguez gavelled the meeting to order, her expression heavy with the awareness that what was about to unfold would define the town's future, would define her administration's legacy. Tonight we address allegations of systematic harassment against longtime residents, she declared, her voice cutting through the crowded chamber. This matter is grave. It strikes at the core of our community's safety and identity. Deputy Martinez stepped up first, delivering his statement with the calm precision of law enforcement. He read from an official report documenting months of escalating offenses. We have verified cases of property vandalism, environmental violations, interference with emergency services, and attempted extortion, he said firmly. The evidence points to a coordinated effort aimed at forcing property sales through unlawful intimidation. Then my turn came. I rose deliberately, aware of every eye fixed on me, and took out my phone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to hear something recorded yesterday morning in my backyard. The audio played flawlessly, Brenda's own voice filling the chamber, offering $20,000 to break my lease with the sheriff, threatening bureaucratic retaliation, and warning that things would get very difficult if I refused. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of news cameras capturing every second. People audibly gasped as her voice detailed her development ambitions, her connections at City Hall, and her intent to punish anyone unwilling to cooperate. But the moment that froze the room came when her voice turned toward Rex. Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents in neighborhoods where people aren't cooperative. Her high-priced lawyer scrambled, scribbling notes and whispering frantically, but there was no way to spin away her own words broadcast in crystal-clear audio. Next came Fire Chief Torres, his voice steady but seething as he addressed the blocked emergency access during Mrs. Morgan's house fire. Someone intentionally obstructed critical equipment during an active emergency, declared. That obstruction delayed firefighters and could have cost Mrs. Morgan her life. We now have evidence linking those barriers directly to this harassment campaign. Mayor Rodriguez turned to Brenda, asking if she wished to respond. Her attorney advised silence, but Brenda's pride wouldn't allow it. She stepped to the microphone, radiating false confidence, as if she still believed influence and money could override facts. This is nothing more than a massive misunderstanding, she said, her voice dripping with condescension that had grated on neighbors for months. I've only ever sought to raise property values and enhance our community through legitimate development opportunities. Before she could continue, Frank Morrison rose from the back, his voice sharp and commanding. Brenda, we have your whole minutes where you called long-time residents obstacles to progress and openly discussed accelerating turnover through pressure tactics. We have your contractor invoices for those illegal barriers. We have video of you vandalizing property and dumping waste into storm drains. His voice thundered with conviction. You tried to tear our community apart for your own profit, and every person in this room knows it. The crowd erupted, clapping and cheering for nearly 2 minutes before the mayor finally restored order. When silence returned, Mayor Rodriguez spoke firmly. The council is voting unanimously to fully cooperate with county prosecutors pursuing criminal charges. This kind of conduct has no place in Millfield. We protect our most vulnerable, we do not prey on them. County Prosecutor James Mitchell stepped forward with the unmistakable authority of a man delivering justice. Mrs. Thompson, you are under arrest for attempted extortion, environmental violations, obstruction of emergency services, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Deputy Martinez read her rights, Brenda's polished forehead finally collapsed. Her pricey attorney was already muttering about plea deals as she was escorted out in handcuffs. The chamber erupted once more, this time with the cathartic roar of a community that had stood its ground and prevailed. In the back row, Chuck sat with the look of a man finally unshackled, relieved to see his nightmare marriage crumbling at last. Outside, Rex, waiting patiently with Mildred, likely heard the celebration spilling into the parking lot. Justice had been delivered, the neighborhood safeguarded, and one predator permanently removed from our lives. 3 months later, Millfield felt like a different town, or maybe it had simply returned to the warm, steady place it was before Brenda poisoned its spirit. The morning sun still poured through my kitchen window the same way, stretching shadows across Sarah's coffee mug, which I still couldn't bring myself to put away. But now I could sip my coffee without dreading hidden cameras or the next wave of harassment. Brenda's trial was mercifully short. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she pled guilty to extortion, environmental crimes, and interfering with emergency services. The deal gave her 18 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of probation. Her landscaping business collapsed overnight, and Chuck filed for divorce before sentencing was even handed down. The house next door soon sold to a young teacher couple from Austin, who introduced themselves with cookies for the entire block and asked before borrowing my letter. Meanwhile, my expanded lease agreement was approved the day after Brenda's arrest, bringing in $1,000 a month. It not only covered the higher property taxes but finally gave me the stability I'd been missing since Sarah passed. Now Deputy Martinez shares the garage with the fire department's equipment and the county's new community outreach coordinator, turning my property into an unofficial safety hub that truly raised the neighborhood's value, the very thing Brenda once used as her excuse for harassment. The ripple effects were profound. At a block party, the sheriff's department presented Rex with an honorary canine certificate. Half the town turned out, burgers sizzling on grills while kids climbed over a fire truck parked in my yard. Watching my shepherd pose proudly beside real police dogs with a bad-shaped Namitagra around his neck was, without question, one of the brightest moments of my retirement. Frank Morrison swept the whole election, winning by a landslide on a platform of openness and service rather than intimidation. His first actions as president, enforcing term limits and mandating recorded meetings safeguards to ensure no future Brenda could twist HOA power into a weapon. Today, the HOAS budget funds festivals and emergency readiness programs instead of draining resources on frivolous complaints. Rebecca Martinez broadened her legal aid work, specializing in elder harassment cases, using the documentation system we built. She's already helped expose and prosecute organized harassment in half a dozen other Texas towns. Our neighborhood victory had grown into a statewide movement, protecting thousands. Still, the most meaningful changes showed up in everyday life, the quiet signs of trust returning. Mildred's garden gatherings became weekly rituals where neighbors traded friendship and resources instead of grievances. Mrs. Patterson organized walking groups, which doubled as wellness checks for retirees. The Rodriguez family opened their garage as a community tool-sharing hub, reinforcing the sense that in Millfield, neighbors look after one another like family. I created the Sarah Hensley Memorial Scholarship Fund with part of the additional income from my expanded lease, offering yearly support to local students pursuing careers in community service, education, nursing, social work, or law enforcement. The very first recipient was Maria Santos's daughter, who was heading to nursing school with plans to serve rural areas, exactly the kind of dream Sarah would have celebrated. Each year, seeing those young people graduate and go out to strengthen other communities feels like Sarah's quiet pride still lingers in the evening air. 6 months after Brenda's arrest, I was tending Sarah's restored rose garden when the sound of laughter floated over the fence. My new neighbor's twin girls had discovered that Rex was a pushover for belly rubs and tennis ball fetch. What used to be a vigilant guard dog had quickly become the block's most beloved babysitter. Their parents, both teachers who had chosen Millfield after reading about our neighborhood's resilience, were already hosting parent-teacher gatherings in their own living room that evening. As I stood in the driveway watching those girls giggle while Rex tolerated being dressed up like royalty, I realized something Sarah would have believed with all her heart: communities aren't destroyed by one malicious person. They're strengthened when ordinary folks choose to defend one another instead of staying silent. The air was filled with the smell of barbecue smoke drifting from backyards, the sound of children playing, and Rex's happy sighs. This was what home was meant to feel like. Now it's your turn. Share your own HOA nightmare or neighbor from hell story in the comments. Remember, you're never fighting alone. Your community has more strength than you might think. Subscribe to Whole Stories for more true accounts of everyday people standing their ground against unfair systems. Tap that notification bell so you never miss the next justice-filled episode. And as always, sunlight is the best disinfectant for neighborhood bullies. Thanks for watching today's Hoa Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing karma do its work, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next Hoa drama we uncover.